The harsh red light of the mining station's emergency beacon cut through the darkness of space as Q floated in their maintenance suit, checking the outer sensors. The young Veltar engineer had been alone on Station Kepler-7 for 3 months now, their forearms moving with practiced efficiency as they repaired yet another damaged communications array. The asteroid field around the station was supposed to be empty. That's why the mining corporation had placed their operation here, far from shipping lanes, far from pirates, far from trouble. But as Q's scanner picked up an unusual energy signature, they realized trouble had found them anyway. Buried deep in the twisted metal wreckage of what looked like an escape pod, something was still alive. Q's hearts raced as they maneuvered closer. The pod was human-made, they could tell from the crude but effective design. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans, the dangerous species from the death world called Earth. They were supposed to be violent, unpredictable creatures who fought with a fury that made even the Krexani warriors nervous. But protocols were protocols, and Veltar Protocol said all life was precious. The pod's hull had been split open by asteroid impacts, and emergency foam had sealed most of the breaches. Inside, Q could see a figure in a torn flight suit. Blood floated in small crimson spheres in the zero gravity, and the human's breathing was shallow and rapid. Dying. Q made a decision that would change everything. Working quickly, they attached emergency cables to the pod and pulled it toward the station's docking bay. The human was unconscious, her face pale beneath short black hair. As the bay pressurized and artificial gravity engaged, Q caught the woman before she could hit the floor. She was heavier than expected. Veltar were tall but delicate, built for low-gravity environments. This human felt solid, dense with muscle and bone designed for a world with crushing gravity. Q struggled to carry her to the medical bay, their forearms working together to support her weight. The medical scanner revealed the extent of her injuries. Plasma burns covered her left side, 3 ribs were broken, and internal bleeding was severe. According to the readout, she should have been dead already. Somehow, she was still fighting. Q worked with desperate efficiency, applying Veltar healing gel to the burns and using the autosurgery unit to repair the internal damage. The healing technology was far beyond what most species possessed, designed to work on Veltar physiology, but the basic principles should translate. As the treatment progressed, the human's vital signs slowly improved. Her breathing became deeper, the bleeding stopped, and some color returned to her face. Q found themselves fascinated by the resilience they were witnessing. The stories about human durability might actually be true. The woman's eyes opened suddenly, startling Q backward. They were dark brown, alert despite her injuries, and filled with awareness that spoke of recent trauma. "Where am I?" she asked in heavily accented Veltar. The translator in Q's communication device struggled with the pronunciation, but the meaning came through. "You're safe," Q replied, keeping their voice gentle. "I found your escape pod in the asteroid field. You were badly hurt." The human tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. "My name is Gina Park. I was running from slavers. Hegemony forces." Q's 4 eyes widened in alarm. The Hegemony was the largest criminal organization in this sector, dealing in everything from illegal weapons to sentient beings. They were known for their brutality and their long memory for grudges. "Slavers?" Q repeated, not wanting to believe it. Gina nodded grimly. "They captured my research ship 3 days ago. Killed my crew, took me as property." Her hands clenched into fists. "I managed to escape during a transfer, but their ships are fast. They'll track the pod signature here." As if summoned by her words, the station's proximity alarms began to sound. Q rushed to the nearest monitor, their worst fears confirmed as the display showed multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. 5 vessels, sleek and predatory, bearing the crimson markings of the Hegemony. "No, no, no," Q whispered, all 4 hands dancing over the controls as they tried to raise the station's minimal shields. But this was a mining operation, not a military base. They had no weapons, no defenses against armed ships. Gina struggled to her feet, still weak from her injuries. "You have to run," she urged. "Get to your escape pod and go. They'll punish anyone who helps their property escape." But Q looked at this human, this stranger who had been tortured and enslaved, who was now more concerned about their safety than her own, and made another decision that went against all logic. "I won't leave you." "You don't understand," Gina said, her voice urgent as the approaching ships grew larger on the screen. "The Hegemony doesn't show mercy. They'll make an example of both of us." Through the viewport, they could see the lead ship extending docking clamps toward the station. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. In minutes, hegemony troops would breach the airlock and find them both. Q reached out with one of their hands and gently touched Gina's shoulder. Then we face it together. The human looked surprised, then something like gratitude crossed her face. In all the chaos and violence of her capture, she had forgotten that kindness still existed in the galaxy. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic clang that echoed through the station's hull, sealing both their fates. The airlock hissed open with a sound that made Q's 4 hearts skip a beat. Heavy footsteps echoed through the mining station's corridors, getting closer with each passing second. Gina tried to stand, but her injuries were still healing, and she stumbled against the medical bed. "Stay behind me," Q whispered, though they both knew it would make no difference. The young Veltar engineer had never faced violence before. Their people were peaceful, spending their lives building and fixing things, not fighting wars. The medical bay doors slid open, and Commander Vortex filled the doorway like a living nightmare. The Krexani warrior stood nearly 3 meters tall, his thick gray skin covered in battle scars. 4 red eyes glowed with rage as they fixed on Gina, then shifted to Q with deadly focus. Behind him came 6 more hegemony soldiers, their weapons drawn and ready. The smell of burned metal and violence followed them into the clean medical bay. Well, Vortex said, his voice a deep rumble that the translator turned into mechanical words. "Our lost property, being tended to by a foolish engineer." Q stepped forward, their forearms trembling but their voice steady. "She was hurt. I couldn't just let her die." The massive alien's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "Couldn't let her die? She's not a person, little engineer. She's cargo. Valuable cargo that belongs to the hegemony." One of the soldiers moved toward Gina, but she backed away, her eyes never leaving Vortex. Even weak from her injuries, she carried herself like a fighter. Q could see the strength that had helped her escape from these monsters once before. "The human stays with us," Vortex continued, studying Q with the cold interest of a predator. "But you present an interesting problem. You interfered with hegemony business. You cost us time and resources tracking our property here." Q's voice cracked as they replied, "I just helped someone who was hurt. That's what any decent being would do." "Decent?" Vortex moved closer, towering over the small Veltar. "Decency is a luxury for species that can afford it. Your people hide in your peaceful systems, building your little machines, while the real galaxy operates on strength and profit." He gestured to his soldiers, who began placing metal restraints on both Q and Gina. The chains were heavy, designed for beings much stronger than the gentle Veltar. Q winced as the cold metal locked around their wrists and ankles. "You know what I think about your decency?" Vortex asked, pulling up the station's control systems on his portable display. "I think the galaxy needs fewer examples of it." With a few swift commands, he activated the station's self-destruct sequence. Warning lights began flashing throughout the facility, and automated voices announced the countdown in multiple languages. "No!" Q cried out, watching their home of 3 months prepare to destroy itself. "There's no need for this. You have what you came for." "I have what I came for," Vortex agreed, dragging them toward the exit. "But I also need to send a message. Anyone who helps escaped hegemony property will face consequences." As they were forced through the corridors toward the docking bay, Q caught glimpses of their quarters, their workshop, their carefully tended hydroponic garden. All of it would be gone in minutes, erased because they had chosen to save a life. The hegemony transport ship was larger than it had looked from outside, its cargo holds filled with dozens of other prisoners. Beings from across the galaxy sat in chains, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and despair that Q was beginning to feel. They were pushed into a holding cell with metal walls and a single small window. Gina was placed in the same cell, her medical restraints replaced with the same heavy chains that bound Q. Through the porthole, they watched Station Kepler 7 explode in a brilliant flash of light, taking with it the only home Q had known for months. "I'm sorry," Gina whispered, reaching out to touch one of Q's hands. "You saved my life, and now look what it's cost you." Other prisoners in nearby cells turned to look at them. An elderly Zephyrian with torn wings. A young Altarian couple holding each other close. A Veltar merchant who stared at Q with recognition and pity. "Why?" Q asked, not really expecting an answer. "Why do they do this? Why do they hurt people who just want to help?" Gina was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars through the small window. "Because kindness threatens them," she finally said. "Every act of compassion proves that their way isn't the only way. That there's something better in the galaxy than fear and cruelty." The ship's engines hummed to life, and they began moving away from the asteroid field. Q felt a strange mix of terror and sadness as they left behind everything familiar. But looking at Gina, at this human who had suffered so much and still worried about others, they felt something else too. Pride. They had done the right thing. Even knowing the cost, even facing slavery themselves, Q knew they would make the same choice again. What neither of them realized was that Gina's emergency beacon had been more than just a distress call. It had contained her full military identification codes, her mission parameters, and most importantly, recorded footage of her rescue and subsequent capture. That signal had traveled across space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it proof of both hegemony cruelty and Veltar kindness. It had reached Earth's Deep Space Command 12 hours ago. And humanity was beginning to respond. The message reached Earth's Deep Space Command at 0347 hours, transmitted through a network of relay stations that spanned half the galaxy. Admiral Bin was reviewing morning reports when his communications officer rushed into his office, face pale with urgency. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," Lieutenant Hayes said, placing a data pad on the Admiral's desk. "It's from the Outer Rim. One of our research officers." Bin activated the holographic display, and the image that appeared made his blood run cold. The recording showed a young Veltar engineer working desperately to save an injured human woman in a medical bay. The footage was shaky, clearly taken from the human's emergency beacon, but the details were clear enough. 4 gentle arms working to heal plasma burns. Healing gel being applied with careful precision. A translator struggling to bridge the language gap between 2 beings who had never met before but were now bound by an act of pure compassion. Then the recording jumped forward, showing the same Veltar being dragged away in chains by hegemony soldiers. The small alien's 4 eyes were wide with terror, but they never stopped trying to shield the human woman from their captors. "Her name is Gina Park," Hayes explained quietly. "Senior research officer, assigned to the Deep Space Exploration Program. The Veltar engineer is identified as Q, working alone on a mining station in the Kepler system." Bin watched the footage again, his jaw tightening with each frame. In the final moments of the recording, he could see the mining station exploding in the background as the hegemony ship departed with both prisoners. "How long ago?" he asked. 18 hours, sir. The signal took time to reach us through the relay network." The Admiral stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. At 62 years old, Marcus Bin had served in 3 interstellar conflicts and seen more cruelty than any human should have to witness. But this was different. This wasn't about territory or resources or political power. This was about someone who had risked everything to save a human life. Within minutes, the command center was buzzing with activity. Officers rushed between stations, pulling up star charts and fleet positions. The large display screens showed the current locations of every human ship in known space, from tiny scout vessels to massive battle cruisers. "Sir," Commander Ross approached with a data pad full of communications. "We're receiving messages from the Galactic Council. They're advising extreme caution. Ambassador Chen says that one human life isn't worth destabilizing the entire sector." Bin's eyes flashed with anger. "One human life? They think this is about one human life." He turned to address the entire command center, his voice carrying clearly over the noise of preparation. "This isn't about Gina Park, though we will get her back. This is about a being who saw another creature suffering and chose to help, knowing it would cost them everything." The room fell silent as every officer turned to listen. "For too long, this galaxy has operated on the principle that kindness is weakness," Bin continued. "That compassion is something only the strong can afford. Well, today we show them what human compassion really means." He walked to the main tactical display, where the fleet positions glowed like stars against the black of space. "Activate Protocol 7. Every available ship, every marine unit, every piece of military hardware we have. We're going to war." "Sir," Commander Ross said carefully, "the hegemony controls 47 star systems. They have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. This could mean total war." "Then that's what it means," Bin replied without hesitation. "Send a message to every human colony, every outpost, every ship in space. Tell them why we're fighting. Tell them about an alien engineer who threw away their freedom to save one of our own." The mobilization began immediately. From the shipyards of Mars came the heavy battle cruisers, their hulls still warm from recent construction. From the asteroid mining stations came converted cargo haulers, their holds now filled with marines instead of ore. From the outer colonies came the fast attack ships, crewed by volunteers who had never seen Earth but still called themselves human. Within 6 hours, the largest military force in human history was moving toward hegemony space. Nearly 800 ships of various classes, carrying weapons that had never been tested in real combat and soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a moment like this. News of the mobilization spread through the galaxy's communication networks like wildfire. On peaceful worlds, beings gathered around their news displays in disbelief. The humans, those strange creatures from the death world, were preparing for total war over a single act of kindness. The Veltar government was among the first to respond, sending frantic messages to Earth's embassy. Ambassador Zektai's voice shook as the transmission played in Bin's office. "Please, Admiral, we beg you to reconsider. Our people cannot survive a war with the hegemony. We are builders and engineers, not warriors. Do not destroy our species for the actions of one individual." Bin's response was broadcast not just to the Veltar homeworld, but to every inhabited system in the galaxy. His words were translated into hundreds of languages and transmitted across space on every available frequency. To the Veltar government and all beings listening, we do not fight because Kiyu is Veltar. We fight because Kiyu saw a human in need and chose to help. Anyone who protects a human becomes our responsibility. Anyone who shows kindness to our people earns our protection. This is not negotiable. The hegemony's response came 12 hours later. Commander Vortex himself appeared on the communication screen, his scarred face twisted with contempt. "Pathetic humans," he growled through the translator. "You think your tiny fleet can challenge an empire? We have conquered 100 worlds and enslaved 1,000 species. What can primitives from one small planet possibly do to us?" Admiral Bin smiled coldly. "You're about to find out." The stars bent and twisted as the first wave of human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of hegemony space. Captain Dong stood on the bridge of the UES Relentless, watching his tactical display fill with enemy contacts. 57 hegemony vessels waited in defensive formation around their main supply depot, confident in their superior numbers. They had no idea what was coming. "All ships, this is Relentless Actual," Dong spoke into his communicator. "Remember why we're here. We're not just fighting for victory. We're fighting for everyone who ever showed kindness to a human being." The response came back from dozens of ship captains across the fleet. "Understood, sir. For Kiyu. For compassion." The first hegemony ships moved to intercept, their weapons charging with the familiar glow of plasma cannons. Standard battle tactics called for long-range exchanges of fire, careful positioning, and gradual wearing down of enemy defenses. The humans had different plans. Captain Dong's ship accelerated directly toward the enemy formation, followed by 30 other vessels in a tight wedge formation. Hegemony commanders watched in confusion as the human fleet ignored all accepted rules of space warfare. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim reported from the weapons station, "enemy ships are trying to establish firing solutions. They expect us to slow down and engage at maximum range." "Let them think what they want," Dong replied. "All weapons, prepare for close engagement." Ramming speed. The human ships crashed through the hegemony formation like a spear through paper. Point defense systems that were designed to stop missiles and fighters suddenly found themselves trying to track ships moving at impossible speeds. The humans didn't slow down to exchange fire, they dove straight into the enemy formation and opened fire at point-blank range. In the first 60 seconds of combat, 12 hegemony vessels were destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships tried to regroup, but the human fleet had already scattered into smaller groups, each one attacking from a different angle. "This is impossible," one hegemony captain transmitted on an open channel. "They're fighting like madmen." But Captain Dong heard something else in that transmission. Fear. Meanwhile, 3 systems away, Kiyu and Gina pressed against the small window of their prison cell, watching distant flashes of light that marked the beginning of the war. The hegemony transport ship had been traveling for 2 days, carrying its cargo of slaves to a processing center deep in their territory. "Those are weapons discharges," Gina whispered, her face close to the thick glass. "Someone's fighting out there." Other prisoners gathered at their own windows, hope beginning to replace despair in their eyes. An elderly Zephyrian merchant pointed with a trembling finger at a particularly bright flash in the distance. "Ships," he said in broken standard. "Many ships. Coming this way." The transport's captain, a cruel hegemony officer named Vextar, received an emergency transmission from Fleet Command. His face went pale as he listened to reports of human ships tearing through their defenses with tactics no one had ever seen before. "All vessels, return to base immediately," the transmission ordered. "We are under attack by the entire human fleet. They're not following any known combat protocols." Vextar turned his ship around, pushing the engines to maximum speed. But as they approached the main depot, they found only wreckage and debris. The massive orbital station that had served as a hegemony stronghold for 20 years was now an expanding cloud of metal and flame. In the prison hold, Q watched the destruction through their small window with a mixture of awe and terror. They had never seen violence on this scale, had never imagined that their simple act of kindness could lead to such consequences. "They came for us," Gina said softly, tears streaming down her face. "All of this, just because I got hurt and you helped me." The human fleet wasn't just fighting to win. Every transmission they broadcast across hegemony space carried the same message, repeated in dozens of languages: "Return Gina Park and the Veltar engineer Q. Return all beings who aided human civilians. Do this now, or face total war." The psychological impact was devastating. Hegemony commanders who had spent decades building their reputation for invincibility suddenly found themselves explaining to their superiors how a handful of human ships had destroyed an entire battle group. But the humans weren't finished. Captain Dong's fleet moved from system to system, not to conquer territory, but to rescue prisoners and destroy slave trading operations. Every hegemony facility they found was given the same ultimatum: release all prisoners, or be destroyed. Most chose to fight. None survived. News of the human offensive spread throughout the galaxy within hours. On the Veltar homeworld, Ambassador Zektai watched the reports with growing amazement. These weren't the primitive warriors they had expected. These were beings who fought with a controlled fury that focused on a single goal: protecting those who had shown them kindness. "Send a message to Admiral Bin," Zektai told his staff. "Tell him that the Veltar Confederation formally requests Earth's protection. If they fight this hard for one of our people, then perhaps we have found allies worth having." Similar messages began arriving from across the galaxy. 3 minor civilizations that had been oppressed by the hegemony for decades declared their support for Earth. Not because they feared human military power, but because they finally understood what human loyalty really meant. Commander Vortex, watching his empire crumble from his command ship, realized the terrible mistake he had made. These weren't primitive barbarians from a backward world. These were beings who would fight total war for a single act of compassion. And he had given them a reason to fight. The war ended on a Tuesday morning with a single transmission broadcast across every hegemony communication channel. Commander Vortex's voice, once filled with arrogance and cruelty, now shook with defeat as he spoke the words that would reshape the galaxy. "This is Commander Vortex of the Hegemony Fleet Command. We surrender unconditionally to the Human Alliance. All prisoners will be released immediately. All slave operations will cease. We yield." In their prison cell aboard the transport ship, Q and Gina heard the announcement through the ship's internal speakers. Around them, dozens of other prisoners began to cry with relief. The elderly Zephyrian merchant who had been chained next to them for weeks reached out with a trembling hand to touch Q's arm. "You did this," he whispered in broken standard. "Your kindness to the humans started all of this." Within hours, the prison transport's doors were opening not to reveal more guards, but human marines in full combat armor. Captain Lee of the UES Liberation stepped into the cargo hold, his scanner already identifying each prisoner and their home systems. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," he announced, his translator converting his words into dozens of languages, "you are free. Medical teams are standing by, and we have ships ready to take you home." Q watched in wonder as humans moved through the prison hold with gentle efficiency, cutting chains and offering medical aid to beings they had never met before. These were the same warriors who had torn through hegemony defenses like paper, but now they handled injured prisoners with the care of professional healers. 3 weeks later, Q stood in the great crystal hall of the Veltar homeworld, overwhelmed by the ceremony taking place around them. Thousands of Veltar had gathered to witness something unprecedented in their peaceful history, a military alliance with the humans of Earth. Admiral Bin approached the small platform where Q waited, carrying a simple wooden box in his hands. The human leader looked older than in the news broadcasts, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. "Q of the Veltar," Bin said formally, his words echoing through the crystal hall, "you showed compassion to one of our own when it would have been safer to look away. You risked everything for a stranger because it was the right thing to do." He opened the wooden box, revealing a simple medal made of earth silver. "This is the Star of Terra, our highest civilian honor. It has been awarded only 12 times in human history. You have earned a place among the greatest heroes our species has ever known." As Bin placed the medal around Q's neck, the young engineer felt the weight of more than just metal. This simple piece of silver represented a bond between two species that had never existed before, forged in the moment when they chose compassion over safety. But more than that, Bin continued, his voice softer now, you are family to us. Anyone who protects a human becomes our responsibility, and anyone who shows us kindness earns our protection forever. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, watched by billions of beings on thousands of worlds. In the Altarian Republic, government officials debated joining the new human alliance. In the Zephyrian trading posts, merchants spoke of the profits that might come from friendship with Earth. But in the small colonies and frontier outposts, ordinary beings watched and understood something more important. Kindness had power. 6 months after the ceremony, Q worked alongside Gina in their new research laboratory orbiting the Veltar homeworld. The facility was a joint project between their two species, combining Veltar engineering precision with human innovation and determination. The quantum resonance chamber is ready for testing, Gina reported, her fingers dancing over the control panel with practiced ease. Your magnetic field calculations were perfect. Q looked up from their workstation, all four eyes bright with excitement. And your power distribution system solved the energy fluctuation problem we've been fighting for weeks. Their partnership had become famous throughout the galaxy, not just for their scientific achievements, but for what it represented. Two beings from different worlds, working together to build something better than either could have created alone. The laboratory's communication system chimed with another message. Q activated the holographic display, revealing the face of a young Krontian engineer from the Outer Rim systems. Honored Q, the engineer said in heavily accented standard, my name is HFY. Yesterday, a human survey team helped my colony repair our failing life support system. They asked for nothing in return, just like you helped the human Gina. I wanted to thank you for showing us that such kindness was possible. It was the 1,000th such message Q had received since the war ended. Beings from across the galaxy wrote to thank them, to ask about human friendship, or simply to share their own stories of compassion. The young Veltar who had once worked alone on a mining station had inadvertently become the most famous civilian in known space. Sometimes I wonder, Q said to Gina as they watched the sunset through the laboratory's main viewport, what would have happened if I had followed protocol that day? If I had left you to die? Gina was quiet for a moment, considering the question. The hegemony would still be enslaving people. The galaxy would still believe that kindness was weakness. And we would never have met. Through the viewport, they could see a new sight that was becoming common around Veltar space, human patrol ships flying alongside Veltar vessels, their crews working together to protect the trade routes that had once been plagued by pirates and slavers. Children from both species played in the station's habitat rings, learning each other's languages and customs. What had begun with a single act of compassion was growing into something that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. The Q protocols, as Earth's new protection agreements became known, spread throughout the galaxy. The message was simple and absolute: show kindness to humans, and humanity would show kindness to you. Harm those who helped humans, and face the consequences. For the first time in galactic history, compassion had become a strategic advantage.